So thanks for having me, Aqeel. I'm really excited and to have this opportunity to share our story. So I grew up in New York, in Westchester. My grandfather worked at IBM. He was an IBM lifer, and my mother also grew up in New York. And so I always grew up in this very like kind of tech obsessed, innovate or die, Moore's law. The world changes every 6 months, and you always have to be innovating, or else you're going to fall behind. And that was kind of the environment that I grew up in. And so I'd gone to Harvard, MIT, and all these other schools. Ultimately chose to go to Harvard, but cross-registered at MIT for a lot of the AI classes. And it was really at MIT where I saw an early lecture on generative adversarial networks. And that was just blew me away. This was about 2014. And that was so cool. The idea that an AI can be creative, an AI can be an artist, because my dad's an artist and my dad's a painter. And I actually remember growing up, going to the studio with my dad and seeing him, explain some of the design decisions he made, choice of colors, at balance and perspective and such. And so the idea that an AI could do that and an AI could be creative was like that aha moment in that lecture at MIT where I realized that this is really what I would want to dedicate my life to doing, in building those kinds of products, and ideally being one of the creators of these products and these tools. And so that's really kind of the origin of my obsession with generative AI and the idea of like building an AI artist. But at that time, it wasn't really clear what business model I could use to build a company in this space. And I'm very entrepreneurial. I started a couple of venture-backed companies in college. One of them was an ed tech company. But a lot of what we were doing at this ed tech company called Quick Help, it was an on-demand tutoring company. But a lot of it was about also creating it's about personalized learning, right? That was continues to be the big trend in education. How do you personalize content based on the information you may have about a person, their interests, their worldview, their background. And a lot of that actually is applied today as well at Omneky, this idea that advertising is education at scale, and that the same principles that work to create enriching educational content for somebody applies also to communicating the value props of a product. And so that company called Quick Help was received backing from Dorman Fund and Rough Draft Ventures, and won a grant from Harvard and MIT, and then decided to focus on that full time upon graduation. I scaled that company to a certain size, and then it was acquired by another ed tech company in the Bay Area called Yup.com, where I led growth. And it was really leading growth that I saw the particular problem that became this opportunity to apply generative AI, which I had been following pretty actively throughout this process. To solve this really hard problem, which is that advertisers have this insatiable need for content. There's an insatiable need to always produce more content more frequently based on feedback from data, and that the end game of that was going to clearly be generative AI. And so it was this deep-seated passion for wanting to build cool generative AI products wanting to start companies and build great products, and seeing the opportunity of applying this to solve this very concrete problem in advertising. But the vision has always been more than just advertising. It's been about generating personalized experiences. So from day one, we've been saying that Omneky generates personalized ads at scale, but also generates personalized experiences at scale. And this is back in 2018, middle of 2018, started a company, Omneky, to generate personalized ads and experiences at scale.
How did you go about constructing aspects of that company? Because
Yeah.
I'm assuming at that point in time, certain libraries didn't exist yet.
Yes.
And even though there were some out there, and a lot of what's been built on top of those original ones, but some algorithms were just available that weren't programmatically implemented in a simple manner. So I'm assuming you had to do everything from scratch.
Absolutely. The
From a technology perspective, right?
From this lecture in 2014, right, seeing the early generative adversarial network model images being generated at that time was still kind of a dreamscape, kind of hallucinogenic, psychedelic imagery. Understanding Moore's law thought that within a couple of years, AI would get better than humans at generating content and generating imagery. So I thought that future was coming closer than not in the very near future. And 2018 felt like the right time to get starting on Omneky. And the reason why was because I felt that ultimately the generative AI technology would be largely commoditized, because I was following a lot of the research, and a lot of the research was done in a very open source nature, and a lot of the code for generating, for this generative AI tools were open source. Hugging Face, right? I was actively following all the cool projects there, and it seemed like the space was developing in terms of the core generative technologies, kind of in this open source nature. Also, partly because a lot of the technology was being done by global set of researchers from different institutions, right? I mean, you had Google releasing the famous Transformers, attention is all you need paper, and that was, but it was accumulation of a lot of other papers being written as well from a lot of other companies and research institutions. So I was pretty confident the generative AI technology was going to continue to advance on its own pace. And then so the question then became, okay, so this future is coming. Generative AI is going to enable anybody to generate images and video and media very quickly and instantaneously and cheaply. Then what is the moat, right? And what are the business opportunities? And as a serial entrepreneur, I kind of saw a couple of moats, right? And this is back in 2017 as I'm ideating, getting ready to start this company. The first one, I think, was going to be brand. And I think especially in a space that is rapidly changing and there's a lot of noise, brand, consumers and customers gravitate towards trusted brands because there is so much noise. And a great example of this, for example, is the 1990s and Yahoo, right? Yahoo didn't really, Yahoo had all these people crawling the web and kind of categorizing the web, but ultimately their moat was their brand, right? And it became one of the most, if not the most valuable company in the world, based purely on that strength, and partly because it's a reflection of how noisy the internet era was, with all these products being launched almost every day. There was a new IPO of a new product, an internet-based product, and ultimately in that noise, brand became a big defensible moat, at least temporarily, until other companies came along with more durable moats and stronger network effects. But that in that initial kind of phase, brand is sufficient when there is a lot of chaos and there is a lot of noise to differentiate yourself. And so I wanted to get started on building that brand as fast or as early as possible. So it was much better for me to be too early to the space and start building that brand early than being too late, in which case there is no opportunity really to build a brand because at that point there's already too much noise. And that it precisely because there were no competitors at that time claiming to generate ads with AI, personalized ads with AI, that we could get started on building this brand earlier, and then now we've established one of the leading brands in generative AI for advertisers. And so brands are built on trust. Trust is based on consistency, and trust is a function of consistency over time, right? And so we have a 4+ year head start building this brand, consistently communicating that Omneky is the leading generative AI company for advertisers. Omneky generates personalized ads at scale year over year, not pivoting, not changing our messaging from one product to another, but consistently staying focused on that messaging has developed and made Omneky one of the leading brands in generative AI. That's one. And then the other big moat I saw was in data, right? And not necessarily open source data that anybody can get access to, but really proprietary data, right? And in particular, personable, legally protected data, right? And there's lots of kind of categories of legally protected data. There's medical records, right? And there's interesting companies in that space. There's obviously genetic data and research data, and there's also personable, PII data, personal identifiable information data, and that is also legally protected. And therefore, one can build a moat around accumulating this data based on all the customers we work with and all the platforms we're integrated with, that then makes our models more better and predictive, and it's very difficult for other competitors, potential or future competitors, to get access to this data. And then the other big moat was these data integrations, right? So it's not trivial to get access to the Facebook Ads API or the Google Ads API or the Microsoft Ads API or the Amazon Ads API. You do need to have a track record of running ads on these platforms consistently over time with certain results before you get API access to these ad networks. And that just takes time again. So the first 2 years really, especially as generative AI wasn't there yet in terms of generating a fully fleshed out ad, the focus for the first 2 years was on two things: getting the data integration set up, getting access to the ad APIs, and building the brand. And then so when generative AI inevitably came sooner than later, we'd be in prime position to, we'd have this really big head start in terms of data integrations, and trust to then continue to execute and scale our business.
What was the product in those first 2 years?
Yeah. So the early product was built on BERT, and there was this early Control, which is like another model from Salesforce, and GPT-1, right? Just the early transformer models, and then stock images. And so we would integrate with a different ads API. We would suggest stock photos based on what's driving sales. And then we generate copy with GPT-1 and other models we pulled from Hugging Face. We then fine tune those models. I mean, initially these GPT-1 wasn't an API. You had to host and train the models yourself on your own GPUs and servers. And so that's what we did, is that we built these custom models in the first couple of years. And then we swapped out GPT-1 with GPT-2 and GPT-3 and GPT-4, and then we swapped out stock images with Dolly, and then now with custom stable diffusion based models fine-tuned on our own GPUs.
What was going on in your head at the time? Because it seems, did you have this entire roadmap ahead of you when you were laying things out? It seemed you approached it very level-headed at 2017. You're like, I'm going to start this company.
Yeah. And
you're thinking about things like going to market, I'm assuming already. It seems like you had really laid out a lot of these parts and sort of like there's a bet you took as to like what the timeline actually might look like in reality, but it's one of those things where you can only look at the car going, like the mirror's going backwards, and you're just kind of driving with the window in front of you, or visible in front of you, but you're sort of predicting what the road's going to be like. How did you adjust for that sort of margin for error on some mistakes? Like maybe you missed the Gen AI wave. Maybe you were like, it's way further out there when things became actually useful production.
Absolutely. I think you can predict the future, but the timing is not always predictable, right? So you always that like something will eventually happen, but you don't always know the timing. And the famous quote is you can run out of money before you proved right? And so and so therefore, as a business person, as an entrepreneur, the focus was being getting to profitability as quickly as possible, so that we can survive until that moment came. And so therefore, Omneky was revenue generating pretty early on, and essentially break even. We were operating break even profitable until essentially this year, and that was late last year. And so is when we really switched gears as DALL-E came out and ChatGPT. It's like, okay, this is game on now. This is the moment we've been waiting for. But we were super disciplined and scrappy for the first 3.5, 4 years, because precisely to your point, we didn't know when that moment would come, and a lot of the struggles and the challenges early on was just keeping the company alive until this inevitable future arrived, and just being super diligent in terms of cash flow management and unit economics and gross margins, while continuously building on our brand, while continuously building on our data integrations and data moat. And so, it definitely helped, and it was another key strategic focus was profitability / break, being profitable / break even profitable, and operating that way leanly, so that we could survive until that moment came.
You articulate it well, but it's not easy to do. What were your references, and how were you going about diligence with the cash flow up front in the beginning of this entire journey? Right, because you need enough to operate. And most of the time, it's just being able to keep the lights on, eat, right? Especially beginning there.
It was a trade-off, right? I mean, there are pros and cons to starting an ad tech company, right? Okay. And the reason why we chose ads was because I knew we could get to profitability. It's a high advertising. The pros and cons is that it is high. There's a lot of money in advertising, right? So you manage a lot of cash flow when you manage ads. Because all your customers, a lot of the customers are managing millions and millions and millions. You're spending millions and millions of dollars a month, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on ads, and so you can build a business very rapidly. Also, this is why advertising is very competitive, because theoretically anybody can start latching on and kind of bootstrap business in this way. But the reason why we chose advertising was not because I necessarily. I mean, I love advertising. I think it's one of the most fascinating things. It's really a really rich way of viewing the world through. Kind of viewing viewing the world through like an attention economy and monetizing attention is like a very interesting perspective that you develop being in advertising, but we were kind of almost forced into advertising early on because of the focus on profitability. And so like if I thought the generative AI future was very, very near term, and I didn't, and if, then I may not have, I may have chosen some, more, space that like, for example, VCs tend to like, right? That isn't advertising and slightly less competitive, but because we're focusing on getting to profitability and surviving until this moment came, we were just kind of gravitated towards the advertising-based business model, and initially building our POC because of the kind of the large cash flow nature of those businesses. Number one. Mm-hmm. Number two was because again, data, right? I mean, the vast majority of data is in advertising. The average cost per 1,000 impressions is like $10 to $20. So you can get 1,000 impressions by spending like a fairly minimal amount of money, versus an average cost per click is like $3 or $4. And so one initial kind of decision to make was, do we want to build a landing page optimization tool? Do we want to build an ads optimization tool? Those are both key, very, very compelling markets to start with in generative AI. And we chose advertising because, to get to 1,000 impressions, to run it on your landing page, to run like get to statistical significance on your landing page, you need to spend thousands of dollars, right? Versus you can get statistical significance pretty quickly with a fairly small amount of budget in ads. That's just how much more data there is in advertising. And if we believe that the moat was going to be in data and data integrations, which was the conviction, then advertising would be the place to start. And so, this is why I want to make clear that like our vision. We want to be, we're going to be we are the leading advertising generative AI company, but our vision is a lot larger than advertising. We started with ads because that's where the large amount of cash flow was, that's where the large amount of data was. But we're going to then use that position of strength and then expand into basically every other customer touch point.
This is quite interesting. In the very beginning, when you're at GPT-1 stage, my thing wasn't particularly close to anything as we were looking at today. I'd imagine, and like you said, it seemed like you spent a lot of time particularly studying the importance, like you said, of advertising can be education. And I've never heard it framed that way, but it very much is, right? You're educating the consumer on something.
Yeah.
It just didn't click for me until you said it that way. So how did you do this? Did you build or fine-tune on top of that for the copy to be useful and salient for these advertisers? Did you have a lot of human intervention? It just felt
absolutely.
Like at this point you're just an ad agency with a little bit of process automation.
Yeah, I mean
from GPT-1 or something.
Yeah, so to onboard a customer with GPT-1 would take at least a couple hours, right? Because we'd have to fine-tune each model for each customer when they got onboarded, and the output was all right, but at that point it was so like basically it was definitely like onboarding every customer took hours if not a day in terms of training and hosting fine-tuned models based on the customer's landing page data, based on maybe some articles they've have had about themselves, maybe based on a historical set of ads, and so the onboarding process there took long, and then the other big, this is also why the first product for the first 2 years, 2018, 2019, was less on the copy generation because that took a lot more time, but just set up, but was actually about design analytics. So the way and this is also very key in terms of getting access to the data, which we believe would be a mode in the future, is that there aren't really, even today, there aren't really great analytics tools for designers. Every single role within a company has a good analytics tool, whether you're a product manager or a salesperson or a marketer. There's a lot of great analytics tools, but designers were a role where there wasn't much great analytics. And so, but with computer vision around 2017 got very, very good. Could solve that problem, right? You could quantify all the design elements, correlate that, and build predictive models regarding those design elements, and click-through rates or or return on ad spend or sign up rates or sales rate, and then get good design insights from all the ads. And then you can apply those insights not just to build better ads, but also to build better landing pages and other customer touch points. And so the initial product that we sold, and we got the early customers from, Curology and Molecule to like Stan Socks, was, and this was the first 2 years from 2018 to 2020, was an analytics tool. And that's actually how we built our early kind of predictive models by utilizing design to get design insights from advertising data to then that would then become the basis for then layering on the generation on top of it. But that said, analytics, not the most highest revenue or stickiest product, right? I mean, customers get an insight once and then they come back and they're like, I don't really, I'm not gonna, like you have to keep producing good insights every single week, every single month to retain a customer when you're an analytics tool, and also the how much you can charge for analytics tools also. So it was definitely, the first 2 years was very shoestring in terms of our operations, and then as generation got better, then layering on generation around 2019 2020.
I do want to get into the space where we're talking about the future of ad tech, how we're going to have to revisit things like search rank and things of this nature, where there's less hacking to get into this space. But the way, I'm curious to hear a little bit more before we get there, how you slice and dice the entire ad tech industry. It's huge, like you said. It's fast moving, it's cash flow heavy, but you had to know like where to get in there segmentation wise, and how you reach those customers from the very beginning. Was this from your early just connections that you had a way in to work with these customers and just optimize on all those? I don't know, I guess these early products, it seems like you're still prototyping while selling.
Yeah, for 2018, 2019,
Yeah, which is just like, it's a long time to sort of be in limbo. I think, seemed like, obviously, again, you said serial entrepreneur, it's fine for you. But there's a process here. What I'm hoping is that the listener I want to target through this podcast sometimes are the folks that are trying to build from home.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? And so how are you slicing and dicing then? Yeah, you're bringing it history. Of course, we're going to get into the future later, but
a lot of cold emails for sure, right? That's a big part of it. Just sending a lot of cold emails to marketers and CMOs, and even if 1 out of 100 can respond, that's still a customer. So even to get those 3 customers I mentioned, early on, it was like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of emails we did. I did in terms of outreach, and you just can't give up, and you just got to keep at it, be consistent, and just be kind of relentless there.
And you're bootstrapping this, right? This is just your time at this point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so I'd actually lent all my money I had personally saved to the company as like a loan, and kept the company alive that way. I actually, had my the amount that money that I'd saved for my education for potential graduate school. Also, had that amount invested into the company. I was lucky in that I got some early angel checks, like an early pre-seed kind of funding from Village Global. And so they were very key and instrumental to supporting and nurturing the company in early days and making critical intros to marketers in early days. So that was, having started a company in Boston and having started a company now in San Francisco, I can say that like having access to like a network is like really, especially when early on, like the difference between life and death. Like starting a company in Boston, which is still has strong networks, being based in Harvard, strong networks there, but it does not compare to the network of being in the center of Silicon Valley, Cerebral Valley, like just being, the networks in in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley are so strong, and people are always gravitating towards people doing interesting things. So as long as you're out there doing interesting things, nobody cares what your background is or, like these things, like people just want to help people doing interesting things. And so being also based in San Francisco made a big difference in terms of getting access to some of these early customers. And again, going to random events, like literally how we got Molecule early on was I literally went to an event at Molecule, like literally after the event, like went to the CEO and was like, I'm working on this, would you be interested at all, right? And then getting an opportunity there. And so, but you couldn't do that unless you were based in San Francisco, right? So for the listeners, I would say, try to get to Silicon Valley as fast as you can, because you really can't beat it. It's the global capital for tech, right? And it's global capital tech because you have these deep network effects associated with investors, key talent, entrepreneurs, customers, research institutions, and such. And so, nothing beats the dense network effects that exist in Silicon Valley. And so, that definitely made the big difference, especially early on when we had absolutely very little capital to get those initial customers, to get those POCs off the ground.
I'd also imagine some of the connections from university are pretty salient for you as well. I'm thinking about folks, let's say they're in India, there's IITs are amazing organizations. I mean, there's this alumni base you can try to find. There's digital tools on LinkedIn to just query forward to your alumni school and try to just do the cold outreach that way. Of course, try and go to events in your local metropolitan area seem like that makes sense. What were you thinking about in terms of how you went about product at the time?
Yeah.
Because right now people can just keep shipping products right now.
Sure.
And they're thinking there's a company there, but sometimes it's not.
Yeah,
I've seen arguments on both sides.
Absolutely. I mean, so I love INT. We have a lot of great team members from INT, and we recruit, very actively from INT, and it's a great institution. It makes the acceptance rate for Harvard look very high. And yeah, I mean, the competition to get into INT is so brutal that it really is. It really is a great proving ground, and therefore rightly a great and very strong network of people who go through those institutions. And I definitely think, I think there were two strengths in terms of the network, educational network, right? As a serial entrepreneur as well, I had a previous contact to investors that I had connected with that could, like for example, Village Global, I knew Village Global and Dwayne because I met her at when I was doing my previous company, which was an ad tech company, and she was the CEO of Chegg. And I met her, and she's also, Harvard alum. She went to Harvard Business School, and I went to Harvard College. And so, and then, they ended up being the first check into the company. Actually, the day after I left my previous company. So, that would not have happened if, she hadn't gone to Harvard and I hadn't gone to Harvard, and she wasn't a partner at this venture firm, and I hadn't met her 2 years ago in a different context from a previous company and developed trust over time, right? University relationships matter, definitely help, and yeah, definitely be using, you want to, business is a competition, right? You should be using every single advantage you have to give yourselves a competitive edge over others, and so that is a key. There's another key edge that if you do have those institutions in your career, then I think those do help.
Definitely, I think the good serial entrepreneur that I guess survives this entire game and has more upside than others. Everyone's got a toolbox they're handed. It's like you're handed a set of poker cards that you're dealt with, and it's how you play it with them. Right, that matters. It's how you position yourself, how you're carrying yourself, how you're leveraging one over the other, and there's always bets you're placing. Maybe it's faith, maybe it's blind trust and confidence.
Yeah, I mean, you have to definitely believe in yourself and your destiny,
right.
and some kind of higher being or higher power
that
is you have to have faith.
Yeah.
In your journey, and you gotta believe that is really ultimately what differentiates successful people and also entrepreneurs from unsuccessful is and obviously there is some kind of selection bias here, but like every single successful person is successful because they didn't give up, and they will always say the same thing, which is why were they successful, is because they would say I wasn't the smartest person, I might not, but I was the person who never gave up,
right?
Because that is just by far
100%. So for the first time entrepreneur right now, I mean, you can watch the Y Combinator videos. I think there's just gold mine of knowledge in there right now from all.
Oh, I love Y Combinator. Yeah, it's a great. I learned startups through Y Combinator. I mean, I think this is one of the. I think honestly, one of the great things, talking about America and like what makes America great is that it is a country that whether it's through institutions like Harvard or Y Combinator that they produce entrepreneurs, right? That they productize entrepreneurs. Even getting the early 10K, 20K check from, Dorm Room Fund or Rough Draft Ventures as a college student, regardless of if Dorm Room Fund or Rough Draft Ventures actually makes money for these funds, trained myself, gave me a chance to learn how to be an entrepreneur, right? Mm-hmm. And entrepreneurship is a skill. You need to learn to market, you need to learn to sell, you need to learn to build products, you need to learn to hire, you need to learn to recruit, you need to learn to fundraise, and you need some amount, like definitely receiving some capital early on to be able to at least feed yourself while learning, learning and failing is key. And there is this massive institutional network, at these research institutions in Silicon Valley that finances young people to give their ideas a try, and then even if they fail, give them financing for that next thing. That is like an institution, and then also educating people throughout that process. And so, that is, one of America exports entrepreneurs, and partly I think this is because and innovations in many ways in technology, and this is because of this massive kind of infrastructure through research institutions, Silicon Valley, things like this that create an opportunity for people to learn how to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and so to your point, I mean, there's belief in yourself, belief in a higher power. I agree with some, I guess we're going to call metaphysics for the moment, for the time being.
That goes.
Sure. But it's interesting as Y Combinator and some of their and sort of there's this entrepreneurship education with very rich literature and videos and breakdowns now and infographics that just explain concepts that are very hard, but you grasp it, because you're applying it as you're learning these things typically. What's the best way to do it?
Yeah.
So there's something there in terms of formulaically finding entrepreneurial opportunities.
Yeah.
And especially as we're getting into the idea of just microeconomic principles of better product at a lower price.
Yeah.
So folks right now can build a Gen AI tool in a day and less and get that thing in production and get it immediate user feedback from posting on a subreddit, posting to relevant Twitter folks, and DMing it to your ideal customer.
Yeah.
Just try this thing out, try my alpha test, pilot it out and see what happens, and then do the whole value assessment later and release it based on as you go.
Right. Well, there's the classic innovator's dilemma, right? Innovators exist, opportunities for entrepreneurship exist precisely because you can, the way one format it works, and there's many different patterns of this, but Clay Christensen in his book Innovator's Dilemma explains that you essentially enter the market initially with an inferior product at a much better price, right? And then as the inevitable compounding power of technology improves, exponential rate of technology improves, that product gets better over time, and then it beats out the incumbent who is not improving at the same rate because they're not maybe as latched onto the right technological wave. And so there's a that is one pattern is cheaper product, slightly inferior, but good enough to create value, right? Some form of product market fit that lets you kind of then eventually disrupt the incumbent from the bottom of the market. It is one pattern of entrepreneurship. And then the other big question is, why are big companies so bad at innovation, right? And it's because of fundamentally this innovator's dilemma, right? If you're a company that's generating $200 billion a year in revenue, and you need to grow revenue 10% or 20% year over year, where are you going to find $20 to $40 billion additional revenue? You're not going to, the next year, right? You're not going to get it from some small, some a hackathon idea or project or some very early technology. That's not going to generate $20 to $40 billion for the business next year. What ends up inevitably happening is, let's just do more of what we've always been doing, or let's raise prices, or let's degrade quality and get more scale. And what ends up happening internally at these big companies is you might have an advocate for a really cool, compelling idea. You might have internally a visionary, right, that says, I really believe in this future with this product. They almost inevitably, at the senior levels of that company, senior levels of management, end up losing out to the very obvious narrative, which is, why not just, instead of spending billions and billions of dollars on this kind of idea that might take 10 years to see any kind of ROI, we need to hit revenue numbers. In fact, the market compensates the management's ability to hit revenue numbers in a short-term basis. And so inevitably, those innovative voices, those champions who push for very frontier technologies end up losing out when it comes to gaining new additional resources from, let's just continue to scale out what's currently working. And that creates opportunities for entrepreneurs, because fundamentally what you need to build compelling products is entrepreneurs who don't give up for decades, or at least a decade. It takes like a decade to build a great product, right? And to build a great company. And like internally at a big company, you're just not going to see that kind of conviction and ability to keep attracting resources internally for a decade plus within a big company. While you can do that outside of a company as long as you continue to convince investors, and there's a lot of capital out there in the world, as long as you continue to invest and continue to convince subsequent investors to give you more runway to prove out your ideas. That opportunity is available to do outside of a company, very hard to do within a company. And so that's what creates opportunities for entrepreneurs. Well, I think actually that's the advantage entrepreneurs have, is that they can be, in fact, the only going back to this point, right, which is that big companies are very short-term thinking because they need to hit large revenue numbers very quickly,
Okay.
while entrepreneurs don't need to hit large revenue numbers very quickly. Large entrepreneurs only need maybe are already starting from a very small base. The advantage, and in fact, an advantage an entrepreneur has is you can operate with a slightly longer-term vision. In terms of, and in fact, that's the competitive advantage entrepreneurs have, is they have time in some ways. Like they have more time than the management of a big company. And so, if done well, and so, like you kind of want to pick those opportunities. How does anyone make money, right? You make money by buying low and selling high, right? In some ways, right? And what does that translate in terms of entrepreneurial activities? Well, how can you buy something low, whether that is a stock or some business opportunity? It's because nobody else believes in that opportunity. That's why it's underpriced, right? Whether it's a business idea or a certain kind of asset. And so having contrarian long-term visions of the future is the basis of every good entrepreneurial idea. Like you have to find, if everyone thinks it's a good idea, then it's already overpriced and probably not a good opportunity in terms of ROI. You have to find the things that people think are not good ideas that you're convinced that are over a longer term time frame create value, and then stay steadfast in that vision. And I think the other big thing is, going back to this concept of not giving up is, it's like setting a goal, right? Like climbing a mountain or something, right? And then there are many ways to get to the top of the mountain, right? So you should never give up on the goal of climbing this mountain. But you can be flexible in terms of the path there, right? So maybe you go up to 2 yards and you realize that this path doesn't work and you have to climb back down and then climb a different path, right?
Gotcha.
But what happens sometimes with entrepreneurship is you try climbing up so many times and you fail so many times that you end up giving up. Like just because you can't, you failed in several attempts in terms of trying to climb the top mountain doesn't mean that you should give up. You should just give up that particular tactical path, but you shouldn't necessarily give up the goal of wanting to climb this mountain. And I think that's very similar to entrepreneurship, is you should have a vision of what the future is. There are many paths to that vision, achieving that vision, depending on the competitive landscape and the technologies that are available, and the consumer's awareness of various value props. But doesn't mean, so you should be flexible in kind of the tactics, but you should be very inflexible in terms of like the objective, the goal.
Yeah. So there's something there where, YC says the only two things you need to do, build product and talk to customers. So we're getting at a particular type of validation. I think belief in oneself and to take this journey to know that there's a mountain for you to climb. First, you just see the mountain. Then you have to make the climb. And that's the physiological obstacle there. And there's all this infinite number of obstacles to get to that mountain. And once you come to the first mountain, you realize there's another mountain behind that one, but you just enjoy the climb and enjoy the view while you're there. And there's a descent. You climb another mountain that's bigger next time.
Right.
It's probably a little bit of your life story there. Capture it analogously. We can do a mid-journey prompt to cargo climbing mountain and then find another mountain at the top that will generate one. That can be like the thumbnail for this video.
For sure, absolutely. Always climbing that mountain. Always climbing that mountain.
But for entrepreneurs, there is this need to have a reality of like how does commerce actually happen?
Yes. Yeah.
A person needs to know how to sell a thing to a human that's willing to pay something for that, right? And they need to know how to run a business, right? Profitable business that it's operable, and it's generating generate good margins, and then replicable and scalable, so they can keep distributing, keep going. to hit the the hockey sticks and things like this. So, I mean, there's an importance here of external validation, but doing it with good regards in terms of like, don't give up on the thing. Maybe be particularly passionate because you can see this thing, but if you can't get others to go with you on this journey, then you're not going to go there. You're doing an interesting business model, which was you. This is why I also really much appreciate what's going on with the generative AI wave right now. Is, I mean, even though things have been possible for a long time, folks are now just seeing the paradigm shift, right? Like you could once broom your house and do that as dustpan or whatever, and now there's a vacuum, or now there's a Roomba equivalent, right? At this current stage in terms of the, I guess we'll call this like the co-piloting era and things like this. We're not fully autonomous at the moment. But what a customer wants is a clean house. They don't care whether it was a broom or whatever it was, but now you're saving them a lot of labor or whatever it might be, and maybe the thing now does it by itself and it's a good job. Right. If the Roomba missed spots, even though it could do 60% of the thing, but it couldn't hit corners right. And it's like clear. It doesn't do spills for liquid or something, or messes something up, or hurts the dog, or whatever, right? I'm speaking analogously here, but all I'm getting at here is how does a entrepreneur think about it, especially in today's generative AI way, with what you're physically seeing, what you and I are physically seeing here, with the events we're doing here with Servo Valley, the just general Twitter space and echo chambers that's going on. I know it's a subset of the planet. Everyone's talking about it. Interfaces, API wrappers, etc. Insert joke, but there's some true paradigm shifts going on.
Yes.
There's some good products. This isn't a moat question. This is like how does a person know they have a good idea and can commercialize it and capitalize on that? This is a separate level of seeking validation. Fast, iteratively, and prototyping fast. All that stuff aside, and we're not talking about personal and like sort of like the inner work one needs to do to experience this climb and maneuver through that, and like you said, be able to send out 100,000 emails or whatever it might be to get your customers. All that aside, it's like, how does one know how to set themselves up for external validation to know they can make money? Because you did this with ad tech. You knew there was going to be dollars on that. You knew there was margin to begin with.
I think it's important to think. Well, first off, I think people overthink moats a little too much sometimes, especially when getting started. Like they don't get started in a company because they're like, "What's the moat?" I doubt that Zuckerberg, when he started Facebook, thought single about moats. Like I think he was just trying to build a good product, and I think ultimately, like if you can build a good product and build a good brand around that product, that is quite a strong moat actually. Just focus on building great products, and I'm sure you can find the moats, or there are ways of kind of expanding into moats as you build that product and get users. Because at the end of the day, if you can build a great product and get users, there's usually some kind of network effect, or definitely at least some brand effect associated with that achieving that scale. And you achieve that scale by building a great product. So I definitely would focus on don't overthink too much like modes or defensibility or things like this. Focus on just building great products and growing that product quickly. And if you can monetize it great early on, that's great. But if you can't, being able to fundraise to be able to support the growth of that product, whether that is some kind of infrastructure play or some layer on top of the infrastructure, or a way of orchestrating different layers of infrastructure to construct even more compelling products. I think that's important. I think developer tools continue to be very strong, very sticky, right? So one has to think in terms of what are the switching costs, right? Developer tools are very sticky because it's really hard to rip out once a developer has kind of integrated a product, coded integration into the product. It's really expensive to rip that integration out. I think this is one of the strengths that Stripe has had regarding building and starting with developers. Is it's very sticky. It's really hard to go and somehow try to remove all those instances. And so, one wants to build sticky products. Developer tools, if you can do it well, are an example of a very sticky product. The other thing to think about when it comes to opportunities in generative AI is to think about where is value being captured, right? Where can value be captured? What is the thing that's getting commoditized or over competitive? Like competition creates, competition is, as the saying goes, is you want to kind of stay away from competition, right? Like you want to go into areas where there's less competition because competition drives down prices to some kind of level of efficiency, and so the classic we're in San Francisco, we're sitting in the ferry building. The ferry building in this area, Embarcadero area, used to be kind of one of the offloading points for during the California Gold Rush, right? I mean, San Francisco is a city built on the California Gold Rush.
Yeah.
And all the streets are named after some kind of gold rush reference, and San Francisco in that sense has always been kind of this boom or bust city. But going back to the gold rush, the question is, who ended up capturing value during the gold rush? It wasn't necessarily the gold miners, right? It was obviously you have the jeans and the shovels, but also actually the company that made the most money, America's very first tycoon, was a guy named Vanderbilt, and the way he made all that money was because he controlled the sea lanes from San Francisco to New York, because he had also controlled the canal between the Pacific and the Atlantic in Panama, Nicaragua, right? And so he basically would take a third of all the gold bullion that left San Francisco, and that's how he became so wealthy, was because the choke point actually during the California gold rush was not necessarily in California, it was actually in Panama, Nicaragua, and that's where actually the vast majority of the value was captured. The person who controlled that choke point took a third of the value that was being generated in the gold mines. And so one does need to think more broadly in terms of where are the opportunities in generative AI, where are the areas people are flocking to, and then where are the areas that people aren't really paying attention to that actually have this kind of choke point characteristic that can be an area that you can capture a lot of value.
How do you identify a choke point post-modern world by 2023?
Well, I think it's definitely important to think of what are the scarce assets, right? So for ourselves, we think there's a scarce asset in terms of attention, right? That there's a fixed number of eyeballs, but there's infinite content, and so therefore there's we describe ourselves as a one of the entrepreneurs I really admire, right, is a guy J.D. Rockefeller. He has alopecia like myself, and he's just a great role model. But one of his business, right, was in he started off in the oil refinery business, right? He turned crude oil into, products, and that doesn't actually, the refinery business did not necessarily require one to discover oil wells or anything like this. You just had to position the refineries in the right place and connect them to railroads and distribution centers to capture the vast majority of the prospectors that were going out finding oil. And so for ourselves, we describe ourselves as we're in the data refinery business. We're I try to be kind of try to model myself as, if possible, the J.D. Rockefeller of data, right? We turn data into personalized experiences because raw data in and of itself is not that valuable. You have to turn that into personalized ad or personalized email, and that refinery layer is valuable. Personalized experiences being essentially a form of attention, right? So you're turning something that's a commodity or commodified aspect, which is content, and then maybe some level of data, to a scarce asset, which is experiences. There are only a certain fixed number of experiences in the world because there's only largely a fixed number of humans in the world. And so that is one per choke point. But that said, there are going to be a lot of other, there's a lot of, the economy is always this constant shifting, balance of things as people find opportunities. And so, there's definitely obviously a choke point regarding, semiconductors and kind of the hardware associated with, building these models, right? And there's this, and then there's maybe some, a choke point related to even, the getting the assets or the technology, building the technology that can, that build these very, nanoscale level semiconductors, and there's some interesting plays there as well. And so there's choke points all around us. There's, I think it's kind of important to get a broad perspective of where is there value being created, where is there competition commodifying certain values, and then where are value kind of slowly being accumulated. And the other thing to think helpful is, so those are some of the ways of kind of thinking about where the opportunities are.
Right. This is a pretty decent framework for the layer of abstraction we're at. The importance of still finding what is scarce, and where is demand seeing that sparse supply, or vice versa. That's interesting. because the means, whether it's you're wrapping around an API call for an AI startup, or selling physical products, or just delivering a service, there's ways of getting there. And of course, some businesses are better than others because of like.
I think it's also like what is compelling to you, right? Like what are you good at, and what are you passionate about, and what is a compelling story for yourself is very important. Like, you know, there may be a very interesting play, but maybe you're not the right person to achieve it. But versus like maybe there's your set of experiences you've had that gives you a very interesting perspective into a market that gives you a competitive advantage. And so it's also fun. And then also what is like the problem or problem set that like you're so passionate about that you won't give up, because you know, going back to this point that most good ideas are contrarian. That means that people are going to, you know, you're not going to necessarily get a ton of validation early on. That is the nature of good opportunities. And so you have to be able to find a problem that you won't give up on, and that is sufficiently compelling to you that even if you are making no money, and for a very long time, you're willing to wake up every day and keep grinding and moving, you know, the ball one step forward every single day cumulatively, because that's how progress is made. And there has to be that level of like fit in terms of yourself and the problem that you're solving.
Yeah, this makes sense. Even, you know, as you were saying that, I was just realizing, you know, comparative advantage is like a thing you can say face value. Like, you went to X university, or you're based in X location, so that's like an advantage, one of those cards you can pull, one of the ways you can leverage that toolbox you have as an entrepreneur.
But the reality also is that by not going to those schools, you also have an experience that you know, potentially gives you more empathy to a different or broader customer base. And that you understand their problems more deeply, and you actually are a more compelling symbol for solving a certain kind of problem, because your story is more compelling precisely because you're not that, right? So there's opportunities everywhere, I think. And it's a matter of like having that vision and just not
Where I was going to get back there is that even just your drive, your passion, your willingness to do that stuff can be an advantage in itself. Like just being scrappy.
Yeah,
that's a rare advantage for some folks.
And also everybody.
It's like something, maybe it's like an industry, some space that you're just willing to do this random other workaround means, because that's just how your personality type is. You're like, maybe like your laziness habit is something that makes you find some sort of exposure, some loophole better than what everybody else is doing it just in the industry, because you just have this other background. Yeah, absolutely. And furthermore, I think like everyone loves an underdog story, and so you know, some of the most, you know, compelling entrepreneurs, you know, like, because in some ways also as an entrepreneur you are you know, the instantiation or manifestation of the company, right? And you're also building both a product and a company, but you're also building yourself as an entrepreneur, as a potentially a symbol of a certain industry or of a certain kind of movement, and that's your story matters in that sense. And you know, again, people love underdog stories, and so sometimes you can be a stronger symbol of a certain industry by you know having that kind of scrappy story as well. And so I think you know, there are advantages to being disadvantaged, and there is an advantage to disadvantage, because you gain important skills and at least a stronger narrative by overcoming these challenges. Yeah. So let's get into the future of advertising as you're sort of seeing it, because I think your decade is just halfway through at the moment, right?
Yeah.
So we're getting into interesting space. Yeah, we are getting into a funny timeline right now with and I don't like getting esoteric. I really want to get like the Hikari, like, man, what's in your head? Kind of space here of technology is accelerating, the capabilities are accelerating, but so is the commercialization around these means to produce these better products. And I don't know. I think we were talking recently about what's Google going to do differently.
Right.
How can they cannibalize to protect market share?
Yeah.
Is Microsoft's willing to do this?
Yeah.
We can talk about larger companies. We can talk about these industry paradigm shifts as a whole. We can also talk about
I mean, I think it's really
data, right? Like data is getting pulled from every source. Just to go there a little deeper, it's like you're making predictions on data that we see. Maybe it's semantic images and conversions and click-through rates, whatever.
Absolutely.
But what if you have AI models everywhere?
We think a lot
It's
about
all data.
we think a lot about Google and Facebook and Amazon and Microsoft because those are our suppliers in some ways, right? We buy media from them, and we build integration with them, and we are an omni-channel platform, right? So one of the key differentiations, one of the reasons why Google or Facebook can't do what we're doing is because you need an independent company to orchestrate messaging across different platforms. So brands are built on trust. Trust is built on consistency. And one of the challenges for, say, a Facebook or Google launching their own generative AI product is because they have different data sets. The brand will optimize in different ways on each platform. And so therefore the brand that you interface with, let's say Nike, the Nike interface on Facebook will evolve to be a slightly different brand than the Nike that you interface with on YouTube or the Nike interface on Netflix right now through Microsoft, or the brand the Nike that you interface on Pinterest that now can be purchased. It will be purchased through Amazon. And so you need a consistent. You need a company to make sure that the messaging across these different platforms are consistent, and making sure that it is both consistent and personalized. And we also live in a world where the media environment is getting more and more fragmented, right? We don't live in a world where there's a duopoly anymore of two big companies controlling the majority of the ad market. The advertising market is getting increasingly fragmented, and so there needs to be a company to help orchestrate the messaging across these different platforms to make sure for the brand can feel that their brand is safe and secure and consistent across these customer touch points. I mean, a brand aspires to be your friend, right? And if your friend changed personalities every single time you saw them, you wouldn't trust that friend, right? In the same way, brand should also aim to be consistent across every customer touch point, whether the customer's on Instagram or Pinterest or Netflix or YouTube. I think, and then now in terms of these big incumbents and kind of how the big tech companies and how they think going forward, I think it's a very interesting time, right? I mean, from the perspective of Google, you had this massive what's the story of Google, right? I mean, you had Yahoo that categorized the web through these human kind of labelers essentially, and kind of trying to summarize the web, and that wasn't necessarily the most efficient. They've discovered that you actually by doing reverse linking, kind of like with research papers, you can actually find a very good way of categorizing the web, and that was an order of magnitude better ranking system than summarizing or trying to categorize content manually. But now actually we're in an interesting world where reality now is actually summarizing and scraping the web may result in better results than links, right, and backlinks. And so now actually the core underlying technology and kind of business assumption that Google search is built on is kind of under threat, because there's now this new technology with generative AI, and AI being better at actually synthesizing information and communicating that information to customers in a better way than through links. And that actually, in many ways, as a human, as a human-computer interface, conversation is a lot. We're having a conversation, right? It's a much more natural way of communicating with information and with the world than through a list of links. And so, Google is in this very interesting position where that fundamental shift is happening. But that said, Google has a lot of properties that defend this core search business, right? They have Chrome, so like whenever you go on the web, you automatically can, the basic Chrome bar is connected to Google Search, and then they have Android that is powers make sure that when you ever use Android, the default is search. Is Google Search, and that then powers their search business. But that said, the thing with, like, say, Microsoft and Bing is that, they made these big investments in OpenAI, and, the question is, will OpenAI make back the money? In some ways, for Microsoft, they don't ever need to make money from Bing Chat or OpenAI ChatGPT, because because they have many other forms of revenue, right? And so they can just, as long as they're bleeding out market share from Google Search. So search is Google's main revenue market. Bing is just some new product of Microsoft. As long as they can lose money on Bing Search all day and ChatGPT all day, as long as it's cannibalize, like essentially taking market share from search. And so then now Google is in this very tough position where they need to, figure out, well, if if the main way I'm generating revenue is somebody else's lead generator that can be done for free, then where am I going to make money eventually? You had another classic instance with, say, like Hollywood and Amazon, right? In Hollywood's main business is producing movies, and they make money from margins from movies. Amazon enters with Amazon Prime, where they produce shows, but they can lose money all day on their TV shows and movies, as long as they're getting somebody to sign up for a subscription to buy toilet paper. And so, when one's core business is someone else's lead generator, which they can use, and they can lose money all day, that's in a very tough position, whether it's Hollywood and Amazon Prime versus Amazon, or Bing or Google search and, say, Bing chat or ChatGPT. The other big challenge, I think, is the immunity that these big tech platforms have historically had in terms of the content that they recommend, right? So right now, these internet companies are not legally liable for the content they recommend to their users. And when it's when it's produced in a set of linked results, then you can argue that you don't have a bias in terms of those results. It's not your opinion. But when that information is communicated to you as in the format of a chat message from a company chatbot, it's very hard to argue that that is not the opinion of that company. And then if that is the opinion of that company, then that company is not much more different. They're not really a utility anymore. They're a publisher of that information. And therefore, then they are legally liable for the information that they communicate and they produce, the answer they provide, right? And that then actually puts additional pressure on the advertising business model for these companies, because historically the way platforms like Google and Facebook made money with YouTube and Instagram and Facebook is that why has advertising historically been a tough business? It's because historically you had to spend money to produce that content to get the attention, right? So if you're a newspaper, you had to spend a lot of money to get the journalists to go do investigative research, to get people to buy your newspaper, and then you would then sell ads on that attention. What Google and Facebook early on did was they just outsourced that information into UGC. So they had users produce that content for free to get people's attention, and then they would run ads against that free content. And that was an insane moneymaker because they had no cost at all, right? There's no cost to producing content. They're using free content that the users are providing and then running ads against that. And so it was an amazing business model. But if you start becoming legally liable for that content, if that content that users are producing is disinformation or fake news or harmful to society or harmful to certain groups, then arguably you don't really have that right to that immunity. And in fact, now what we're seeing is that the cost benefits you had from user-generated content, from free content, comes with a flip side cost of content management, essentially essentially moderating content. That now there's actually increased cost in terms of content moderation. So you get the benefit of free content because if user generated content, but on the flip side, you have to spend more money on moderating content. And you're seeing that now. Starting to see that with Facebook. Facebook spends a lot of money on moderating the content on their platform to deal with the fact that the free content that the user generating aren't always correct, or actually could be some of the content is actually very harmful. And so that requires additional investment. So not actually, the potential free launch that seemed possible with just monetizing user generated content comes at this flip side cost of content moderation. And now on top of that, if you as a platform, you lose the immunity you had from the content you were producing, right? Because now the interface is no longer, links to links, but actually an algorithmically recommended message. Then you may not be legally free from that, from suggesting that answer to a potential user. Then that business model was further kind of put on its head. And so I think there's a lot of interesting questions being done here right now in terms of, the future of, legal immunity of these publishers or platforms producing content, recommending content algorithmically, generating that content algorithmically, and where the future business models are in terms of, if some of these fundamental elements of these businesses change.
Do you think the consumer is going to be worse off as we enter into a new age of AI, with AI being omnipresent?
I don't think so. I think the consumers, one of the great things I think about, capital markets in empowering, is that it is it is obsessed with generating value for consumers, right? And that ultimately the longest serving businesses, the most successful businesses, are the ones, because fundamentally companies are entities that live in society, and if you are a harmful actor in society, you will eventually go bankrupt, because you receive support from society in terms of the business model, right? So a complete predatory business cannot really survive for a very long period of time, because eventually people will just get pissed off with that business and stop supporting it and either make it illegal or regulate it. Particularly democratic institutions of capitalism result in predatory businesses quickly going bankrupt, right? Because eventually the democracy will say this business is predatory, it's like coming at the expense of our well-being of the citizens. They'll then regulate that business out of existence. I think consumers don't have anything to worry as long as they live in a healthy democracy. That businesses will continue to focus on building good value for consumers and not be predatory. I also do think that we're still nowhere near AGI, I think. Yes, you're starting to see some semblance of AGI. I think, maybe you can say, the recent GPT-4 passed this early theory of mind test where they have some level of self-awareness. But I think the level of self-awareness, and you're kind of seeing this with even conversation with Cindy, is that really of a 7 or 8 year old, right? That you're really, interacting with an AI that maybe is like a child in terms of its emotional maturity and in terms of its kind of awareness of the world. And so, but a very smart 7 to 8 year old. And so, but that said, GPT-4 about a trillion parameters, right? But the collective amount of neurons of a human society of everyone who lives in the world is 100 billion trillion, right? There's 100 billion trillion neurons in collective humanity versus 1 trillion parameters for GPT-4. And also each of those neurons are not binary, but they're scalar, right? And neurons are a form of levels of activation in terms of, it's not 0, 1, it's a 50% activated, 30% activated, 80% activated. And so there's actually a lot more states that a neuron can have than a binary transistor. And so I think in terms of the complete the combination of states that collective humanity can be in with all the neurons, collective neurons and the different states those neurons can be, still vastly more complex than anything AI will create anytime soon. So I'm short term. I think I'm generally pretty bullish about this technology. I don't think it's the end of the days or anything like this is happening anytime soon, or really even in the medium term. I think there'll be massive disruption as any new technology creates massive disruption, just as those massive disruption with any big technology like electricity or the internet. But generally humanity came better off because of these technologies, because of democracy and capital markets. And I think we're going to see something similar with generative AI.
What is the best way an individual can equip themselves right now from home in general? This is not just entrepreneurially, but I think the word democratization or democracy really touched something for me mentally here, which is maybe folks can start optimizing for local economies a lot more, and we'll see distribution. We can hope so, as opposed to a more tighter concentration of wealth for folks who can capitalize on technology advancements, and then that becomes a slimmer.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's this the theory of economics, right, which is that fundamentally everybody kind of globally, and just in any kind of environment, people will specialize, and that there are certain values to specialization and scale that comes with specialization, and that specialization inherently means concentration of certain kinds of talent and resources, and certain specialties are more valuable than others, right? So I think there's that. The Wealth of Nations from Andrew Carnegie, he has this great, he has this really interesting analogy, which is like the average person in, like, yes, the Gilded Age, lots of inequality, but the average person who lived during the Gilded Age in the late 1800s still vastly better quality of life than people who are living in the Stone Age, right? Or people who lived in a world without capital markets and such. And so, like, yes, there's inequality, but generally, in some ways you need that inequality to incentivize entrepreneurs, but not only entrepreneurs, but actually investors to bet on big bets. That, like, if you don't have those outsized outcomes, it doesn't necessarily make sense for an investor to take that risk on that bold idea, right? Like, if Apple couldn't be, or if Google couldn't have been a multi-trillion-dollar company, then it might not make sense to invest, billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars, to fund that business. And so, like, and thankfully, the world is, I would say, generally better off because everyone now has information at the fingertips, through Google search and such. And so, like, I don't know, like, I think, I don't think, like, inequality in and of itself. I think actually inequality is a fundamental element of like innovation and capital markets and competition, and also actually creates the right incentives for people to make bold bets, and not only for people to make those bold bets, but for people to invest in those bets, and believe in those bets, and really believe in those outsized ideas. If you didn't really have those outsized outcomes, people wouldn't make those bets, and we'd all be living in a poorer world.
A higher net aggregation from just more positive sum value games, because the
Yes.
positive sum value businesses last.
Yeah.
To your point earlier, and everyone's essentially better off.
Yeah, and eventually, look, it's not like yes, like, there's inequality, but it's not like, the inequality, or like people, like the majority of people, of billionaires are like inherited or something like this, right? Like, most of at least half, if not majority of the billionaires are like self-made people, right? They like the wealth dissipates pretty quickly, through generations and such, and so, and just inevitably through competition, right? So, like, I don't know. I think people focus a little too much on inequality and like, because it's and not on the kind of value that like the incentive, like the benefits that one also gets from that incentive structure that is constantly pushing people to take big risks and take big bold bets and also invest in other people's visions.
Nice. If an individual wanted to take a bet, say, it's a gap year from the semester program, or leave of absence from work right now. I don't know, maybe they're more extreme situations where, they're between jobs or something, and it's like they have to run away and they have to start this journey. And, you're thinking in decades as a serial entrepreneur, a wise one does. But some folks need to capitalize the interim, right? At least they feel the need to.
Yeah.
And, I think there's a lot of like, oh, I wish I was in a better position to do X, or this person did. These self-made millionaires had Y, or they had some variable, something in their toolbox that this other person doesn't. So they look at that as sort of a, not necessarily an obstacle, but sort of a roadblock as a whole.
Well, I would say the entrepreneurial journey is very myriad and goes through many different paths, right? And some of the best entrepreneurs started very late, right, in life, right? And so there's nothing like, in fact, I would say the distribution of successful entrepreneurs across time, age when they start the company is actually quite scattershot. It's not necessarily that, the best entrepreneurs are in their 20s. In fact, you can look through history, I think Sam Walton was way, like in his 50s or 40s when he started Walmart, and there's a lot of examples of this. And so, like, I think that the most important thing is, to just be, be an expert in something, like be the best, just become the best at something, become, really like whatever it is that you're passionate about, really become the best at it, and then develop a unique perspective in regarding kind of market opportunities because through that lens of being an expert, and I understand that some people may not have the resources initially to bootstrap a business or get funding immediately, but you can gain that expertise in other ways through working at a company and rising up within a company, and then using that expertise to branch out and start your own product through that experience. And so you can always start a company, and it's never too late to start a company, but the most valuable thing people have is their time, and so really spend that time wisely in terms of really gaining a unique, again, going back to this idea of and this is actually a really interesting, question that people often ask for me as an advertising platform is, with AI, wouldn't all the ads end up looking the same because the AI would just optimize the same thing? But the reality is that capital markets are a function of differentiation, right? That if you think of capital markets as a jungle, there are different kinds of animals in that jungle, right? There's tigers and lions and flamingos and hippopotamuses and they all thrive in their own way. And so, in fact, you couldn't have a jungle with everyone being a tiger or a lion, right? And so this is why actually, to my point, when they say this, there was also sometimes this concern that the data that I provide Omneky may be used to, help a competitor, which we definitely don't. We segment the data between our customers, but also the reality is that what is authentic to a brand to communicate, for a customer might not be the same thing that's authentic for another brand, right? So, for example, going back to San Francisco, there's two great jeans companies, right? Gap and Levi's, both founded in San Francisco, and what makes Gap authentic, what might work for Gap in terms of an advertising campaign may be very different from what works for Levi's in terms of their advertising campaign, because what consumers find authentic to Levi's, they may not find authentic to Gap, and what consumers find authentic in terms of messaging from Gap may not be authentic to Levi's, and so therefore, this is why I think it's important also, to this, going back to this earlier question of how does one kind of tee yourself up to be a strong entrepreneur, is I would say, become differentiated, be unique, be the only one, be the best and only one at something, whether that is, some kind of technology, ideally, especially if it's in technology, if you want to be a technology entrepreneur, ideally it's some kind of edge you have in terms of understanding of a core technology, and developing an edge there, and positioning yourself to be the expert in that space. But you can develop expertise in a myriad of other ways as well. But there are many ways to be successful, and in fact, every single successful company is successful in its own way, and the way you become successful is by being differentiated. And so, just like our customers, our AI finds that unique value props, help one company, find gain a lot of revenue through messaging that is very different from the messaging from a different company. Likewise, I think as an entrepreneur, just become the very best at something unique and differentiated, and then use the fact that you're different as an advantage to pursue a certain kind of market opportunity.
Amazing.